What's up, everybody? Noah Krachivik here, joined with my friend Carlos Garrido. Welcome to the Professor and the Carpenter, that I will always say as such. We got a really cool show lined up for you guys tonight. We're going to be talking about the revolutionary significance of Martin Luther King and why he's misunderstood on the entire left, well, by the entire country, really. We're going to be talking about Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. What happens if Trump wins? We're going to be talking about the massive protests going on in Germany right now. We're going to be answering some of our, let's call them criticizers, and a whole bunch more. We're going to do it right after the international.
All righty, and we're back. How you doing, Noah?
I'm good, brother. I'm good. How are you today? How was your week?
Oh, it was quite a bit of a stressful week. We started the semester, and back to teaching, back to making teaching plans. I've been trying to keep up the Substack that I started on New Year's active. I've been able to post one article a day and keep that bad boy going. Always trying to promote it, get some new subscribers on there. But yeah, that's pretty much it on my end. How about you?
Work in the snow. We've had some issues in my family lately, so kind of a stressful time. But mostly, I've been working on formatting stuff for the publishing press, getting my reproletarianization pamphlet ready, getting Danny's book of poetry about Palestine ready, to get going, working with the production team on streamlining things. For anyone who's seen the new shorts, that is fully an effort of our new production team, which is doing a fantastic job. Like the best job. I could not have even guessed that it could be going better than it is. And out of all of that, I'm sort of in prepping. So when we decided to release Reproletarianization as like a small pamphlet on its own, the plan was always to follow it up with a longer extended book. And so in preparation of that, I'm going through all my notes and reading Hegel again, and then I'm going to go into some later Marx works from that, just to make sure that in my explanation of reproletarianization, I'm sort of walking people through dialectical logic in the whole process of imperialism going to its second stage and what this means for the working class. So most of my time has been with studying, really.
Yeah, those months where you just tarry with Hegel, to use his own one of his favorite expressions, are some of the most important ones for us Marxists, right? You see you have Marx reading The Science of Logic, rereading it as he's preparing the Grundrisse. It helps him tremendously to concretize his knowledge on political economy and to concretize the process of presentation as an ascension from the abstract to concrete. And then similarly in 1914, you have Lenin reading Hegel in Switzerland. And I love pre-1914 Lenin. I don't think that there's a split, as many folks have suggested, but post-1914 Lenin is just a whole nother level. You know, he's
Mhm.
much more dialectical in his writing, in many ways much more complex. And I think Hegel does help us tremendously in not just being the sort of people that call themselves Marxists, they use Marxist terms, but it being the sort of people that have undergone a profound change of outlook. That's what people often don't realize. You can absorb a new series of concepts that belong to a different outlook while sustaining the same bourgeois, often metaphysical, to use the old school term, rigid way of looking at the world. I feel like you can't sustain that outlook if you read Hegel um, in a form that tries to absorb the positive parts for a politically revolutionary project. You always come out of it transformed in terms of outlook, and it makes the analysis that you provide of the world much more consistently in line with the Marxist dialectical materialist worldview.
Of course, and this is something we talk about all the time, and it's something that is possibly the most important thing in our era is bringing Marxism, real Marxism, to the USA. Um, and that's a difficult task because the way we're originally taught to think, we're not even sort of under the impression that a different world outlook is a thing that is possible, right?
Mm.
It's like being colorblind and then someone who can see colors trying to explain to you what colors are, right? And you're just like, it's so much more than this limited way you're viewing it. I promise you, once you can ascend to the concrete and take this abstract thought in your head and make it concrete, you go from a concrete observation through this movement into the abstract, right? This thinking about a thing, and then you make it concrete by thinking about it in its process, in its connection to other things, so it becomes the most concrete form of this thought you can possibly have. And until you really have that, you're sort of just copying conclusions of Marxism. You're the colorblind guy looking at an artist describing the word blue and saying, you know what, blue. Well, let's use red because it's red, right? You're looking at an artist describe the word red, and you're like, yeah, red. I get red, but you haven't gotten to red yet. You're just saying, okay, this guy says red, so we'll say red.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And we have a term that's almost synonymous with the way that the dialectical tradition thinks about the concrete, which is comprehensive, that which is the most comprehensive and holistic. Although some of the hippie types have kidnapped the word holistic, but it's true. You're looking at things from the perspective of the whole. You realize that you have to ascend to the whole. You can't just start from the whole. If not, you fondle and imagined concrete, as Marx called it, and that has to be done in a process that takes into account contradictions, movement, and universal interconnection. It's really not that hard. You know, Marxist philosophers like to complicate it in order to put stuff out in journals and stuff, but it's really something quite simple. And if you understand it well, at least you should be able to explain it to a child. And that's really what we're trying to do here. Take these concepts that have been considered historically difficult, these outlooks that have been considered historically difficult to understand, and break it down so that even if you don't have any experience in the history of philosophy, you'd be able to understand that as best as you possibly can.
100%. That's what it's all about. That's why we do the classes, all that stuff. And I've, because of all the other work I've been doing, completely dropped the ball on getting the new basics of Marxism class together and started. So don't worry, that's coming very soon. As soon as I get this stuff out for the publishing press, that's where my focus is. So everybody who's asking me about that, yes, it's coming, I promise. Just give me a little more time. We have a lot on our plates here. And Midwestern Marx isn't all we do either, right? A lot of us are organizing outside of this. I'm very active in my neighborhood. So there's a lot going on, is all. So Yeah. Um, this almost leads into one of the things we were going to talk about later that I don't think I want to get to just yet. Um, but it sort of undergirds everything we talk about uh, in general, right? Like, why does the left not view Martin Luther King for
Yeah.
what he is, which is a revolutionary leader in one of the most revolutionary epochs in this country's history? And it's because they can't see the concrete concretely, right? They're not looking at the material unfolding of American history for what it is. They're not ascending to the concrete, seeing um, chattel slavery as the creation of the color line, right? And the color line being a form of class struggle or a center that class struggle happens around, right? So they can't see the civil rights movement as revolutionary as going from the old thing into the new thing, right? The old segregated apartheid nation that we were into this what we are now, which is a more united nation, a more American people, right? More united, more together as one people, rather than having these um, abstractions dividing us. Really,
Yeah, let's maybe put a pin in that one until we get to the MOK segment, because I think that's going to be, it's important to keep it compact, especially for the highlights that those folks later on will watch. By the way, we put out a poll for the YouTube. We heard from the specialist that it's really good at driving up views. So it was MOK a socialist? So of course the answer should be yes. But this person is completely right. You know, I've even if he wasn't, it doesn't matter. It's the role that he played. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But shout out to Cobra Commander, the man, the myth, the legend. Top notch moderator here for the Institute. Thank you so much, brother. He says much love to Midwestern Marks. Keep up the great work, gentlemen. We have a world to win. We absolutely do. We have a fucking world to win. So thank you so much for the $20 super chat. As you folks know, the Institute is a people's funded, grassroots funded institute. So these are tremendously important for keeping up our operations. So again, thank you so much to those who have the capacity to donate.
yeah. With that, let's kick it off for the night. What do you want to get into first, Carla?
Well, I think the MOK topic would be good. It's a shame that we've waited 4 days now since MOK Day to touch it. I know we're planning on touching it from the start. We were hoping to make it a relatively large segment. I think that's why we omitted it from the first day. We had gone through a few things, and we ended up being too tired to hit it. And then I really wanted to touch it with you. So we're going to be talking about it today. So as everyone knows, the 15th of January, 4 days ago, I think it was Monday, was MLK Day. A day where the ruling class comes together to celebrate the life of an individual that the ruling class's institutions, specifically the institutions of what's now called the deep state, the FBI, called the most dangerous man in America, and literally plotted to kill him. This is proven material. The deep state killed MLK. And it's interesting because we're presented specifically on the left with this image of MLK as a reformist, someone who's like, sure, he liked socialism, but he was more so of like a soft socialist. And then it's usually compared with Malcolm X, who's more radical, and these other traditions that are more radical, more militant. But what's often overlooked is the correlation of how radical you are to how much the state is attacking you and on your back. No one was getting imprisoned more than Martin Luther King Jr. No one was despised by the elite more than Martin Luther King Jr. And ultimately, no one was able to play as an individual a larger role in moving the class struggle forward in the U.S. More than Martin Luther King Jr., who was able in many ways in fulfilling the third American Revolution with the Civil Rights Movement in 1964 and its continuation that has radically transformed the country. We'll be talking about some of that in just a bit. He was able to conclude in many ways the project that started with Reconstruction, but that was overturned with the counter-revolution of 1876 and 77, when the North, which was aiding the Freedmen's Bureau in establishing a dictatorship of the proletariat led by the Freedmen's Bureau, the black proletariat in the U.S. South, when the North betrayed the black proletariat and the white proletariat, for that matter, and sided with the old planter class and just decided to overthrow that beautiful project of implicit socialism, implicit worker states in the U.S. South, and eventually built America into what it would eventually become, which is this empire that has destroyed most of the world, or at least their America. So King is able to overthrow that state of affair, that fascistic state of affairs that is input after that counter-revolution, that overthrows the gains in civil rights that had been made by the revolutionary struggles of the black proletariat, in conjunction also with the poor Southern whites. But Noah, yeah.
Yeah, I could not have put any of that any better, brother. King develops out of a time that needed a king, right? That needed a Martin Luther King. And this is sort of an issue that Marx used to think about a lot, was if I didn't exist, would these things still being done? And he puts his brain to this application, and strangely, King does this same thing. But what I want to do is turn from all of the stuff that Carlos was just talking about, and then discuss how he's viewed these days, right? How the left views him, how the ultra left views him, how the bourgeoisie view him. Because Lenin tells us that the ruling class will always attempt to whitewash revolutionary leaders. They were doing it to Marx in his day, right? And so they've done it to King in our day. And I've been reading this a lot lately. Testament of Hope. It's all of the collected writings and speeches that King gave, and one of them is really interesting. It's called The Case Against Tokenism, right? And it's exactly what it sounds like, which seems to be what the bourgeoisie would suggest to us that the class struggle against the color line and against racism is, right? It is, to use a phrase Carlos likes a lot, they want diverse faces in high places, but those diverse faces better be doing the work of them high places, right? So King obviously sees this, and he says that this is impossible, right? The black proletariat had matured to an extent because of all of the struggles leading up to this, that they saw themselves not as tokens to be used by white America, but as a fundamental part of America itself, right? That they were, in a sense, actualizing as themselves in the civil rights movement, standing up and clarifying their maturity as a people. Not maturity is a bad word, their development into what they are as what they are, right? Which wins the civil rights movement by leading us to where we are now. And you couldn't have told that they had won at King's death, right? When King died, do you know what his popularity rating was? Like 75% of the US hated him at his death, right? And so I want people to think about this and think about what they say about revolutionaries now, right? The lies they tell about us now, and the people who, in the name of revolution, give you right opportunism, give you liberalism, give you reaction dressed as revolution, even as they use all of these words and call us the reactionaries or whatever other nonsense they make up. I want you to think about this, the These were the people that hated King back in the day, because that is where the social consciousness was, where it was being pushed into by the institutions of the ruling class. This is what makes the black proletariat, especially in this era, the revolutionary agent that led that second revolution, right? It's not just a black revolution, it's a revolution led by the black proletariat for the entire nation.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And as we were talking about earlier, the inability to ascend to the concrete, the inability to be rooted in the dialectical materialist method, prevents them from understanding these movements, which is conjoined to the way that they see America. If you accept the civil rights movement, if on January 15 you're posting about MLK, but then whenever anyone says that the socialist struggle is one that's rooted in the progressive elements of American history and in transforming America into what it's already transforming because of its own inherent contradictions, and that socialism is not about abolish America or any other silly, childish, bombastic slogan, your ideas are incoherent. You can't support King. You can't claim to support the tradition of W.E.B. Du Bois, of Dr. Du Bois, the tradition of the Black Freedom Movement, the most revolutionary and advanced tradition of American class struggles, and then reject America. Because you can't fucking have America without that tradition. You can't have it. There's no such thing as America without the tradition that has literally advanced it, that has been the heart and soul of the class struggle. If you understand as a Marxist that the way to analyze society is through looking at the dialectic interplay between class forces, i.e., that is, the class struggle, you cannot understand America without seeing the heart and soul, the motor of it being the form the class struggle has taken, the determinate form it has taken in the Black freedom movement. The struggle against racism as a class struggle, a struggle against that instrument, as Marx labeled it once, that the ruling class uses in order to divide workers. And it has been a struggle led by the Black proletariat, whether that's in 1865, whether that's in 1964, and everything that came before 1964, which was a whole lot. You can't have 1964 and King without Du Bois. That's another thing. But if you miss this, if you claim to side with this, but then just reject America as a whole, you are in a fundamentally contradictory position. You're placing yourself outside of that tradition and in many ways against it. Because when this movement, which was very forward-looking, spoke about America, it always spoke about redeeming the positive elements of the past. You look at King's speeches, even in the last ones, look at how he always cites the Declaration of Independence. I heard somewhere that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why is that? It's because he had, maybe as a student of Hegel early on, he was part of these Hegel reading clubs, and he was very much deeply rooted in the dialectical tradition. He had an understanding of the concrete character that these struggles have to take. If you are in the US, you have to have your class struggle shaped by the traditions that created your people. That means appealing to the positive sentiments of the revolutionary tradition in order to advance and in order to fight against the reactionary segments of that national contradiction that we call a nation moving forward. So, yeah, I mean, it's the interesting thing always, and I always go back to this, is that it presents itself as very progressive to just demean America, to go around calling people pat socks. It's a fucking ridiculous term. But in reality, it is a liberal tinted American exceptionalism. They are the American exceptionalists. They're the ones that ultimately say, even if they don't actually say it, that imply it. Yes, in China, in Russia, in literally the whole fucking world, people have had to base their socialist struggles, the content, on the national conditions that they're waging that struggle in, right? The Dimitrov formula. Socialism is the content that takes a variety of different national forms. Except the exception is America. America, the US, is the only place where we could just ignore the past and talk about socialism as an abolition of the country that we're waging the struggle in. That is a liberal tinted American exceptionalism. And we have to reject it. It places us in a very, honestly, racist manner as ontologically superior to our brothers and sisters who have had to wage the struggles in their particular conditions in accordance with their particular histories. It says, no, we don't have to do that. We can be above that. We can reject this evil past and not do the dirty job of analyzing its contradictions and seeing what's the potential, what's the rational kernel in the past that we can bring into the future, so that our forward-facing struggle also has this dimension of looking backwards and redeeming those that fought before us and that lost their lives, lost job opportunities, lost many different things in the process of advancing the struggle that we are in today.
Yeah, I mean, you went over a lot there, but all of it is really, really, really important. The people that talk about, America, and you can't build socialism in a settler state, meaning that, which really is a very sneaky way of putting an anti-immigrant sentiment into the left that begins in this anti-settlers form and ends in, nativism and ethno-nationalism and other reaction. But aside from all, what is a people according to Marxism? What is the development of a people, right? The spirit that drives progress. What is that? It's driven by the necessity of the progressive class, right? That alienation we all face as working class people. I don't want to get into a big thing about it, but in the USA, there is a reason every single person will say life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that's a good thing, right? And that these ideals that people genuinely believe in and take into themselves, we don't call these American ideals because we just pooped them into existence, right? In fact, they go through a process of becoming themselves, right? And it takes that class struggle, that development of the American people to actualize those things. And when we get to them, that, my friends, is socialism. When we act as if, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. One thing I want to focus on about what Carlos said was that we take an active role in this process. We must play a conscious role in this process. It's not something already, there and happening without it. We are an integral part of what is there. It's not that, there are objects outside of us and then us, and there's a separation between the two. It is that the relation between our thinking of a thing and that thing, that is where reality is, right? And so our acting upon it, that is what creates process or progress in that motion. And so when we say, American communism, it must include all of this struggle. That's what it is. And not getting that and dismissing everything as, settler colonialism and other dogmas is not understanding that all class society, or the history of all hitherto existing society, is the history of class struggle, right? That's what it is. That's how society becomes society.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's not without reason that I think one of the top 5 most important, I would put it at number 2, the second most important book that has been produced developing the American Marxist tradition. The first one, of course, is Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, or really just the au revoir of Du Bois in general. I've written quite extensively on that. But Winston's strategy for a Black agenda is, in many ways, as other scholars have noted, a defensive king. a king that the ultra left is certainly turning against. And even today, it's ludicrous to think that any of the existing leftist organizations will be criticizing King in the ways in which a lot of Trotskyite groups were in the 60s. But it is still the case that something's missing there. King is still misunderstood. The legacy that King has played in shaping the nation is misunderstood. And it's an understanding that in many ways castrates the meaning and the genuine radicalism of King. Because the radicalism was not just in, oh my God, I hold the most radical ideas. The radicalism was in the ability to mobilize the force that makes history, which is the people. He was able to mobilize the people. And yes, it was a sector of the more reactionary or conservative part of specifically the white working class that was comfortable, that did not like King. But he was so successful in mobilizing the people and in actually winning that struggle in 1964 that he changed radically the ideological composition of the nation. Yes, racist institutions still exist de facto, not de jure. Yes, racist individuals still exist, but the conditions for a united multiracial class struggle are better today than they have ever been in American history. Today, more young people are anti-racist in the sense of consciously wanting to fight against those institutions that on the basis of someone's race consider them ontologically inferior. More young people are anti-racist than those who hold on to racist ideas. That's why it's such a comedic thing now. That's why it's easier to laugh at the jokes and to laugh at racists themselves when something has become a mockery. That's how you know that it has been in many ways castrated of whatever power it once had. I'm not saying again, because people get blips and they turn it into something else. Of course, racism still exists. But the conditions for uniting the working class across the color line are more fertile than they have ever been. And we have King to thank for that. But if we go back to the analysis of the nation and of the class struggle that shaped the 1960s, we will be doing a disservice to those people that made that analysis in accordance with their period, because the successes of their period produced a new period, produced a new America that requires new analysis, requires a reassessment of the color line, a reassessment of the class struggle, a reassessment of the potential of a united people fighting against capital in its most moribund, most parasitic stage that we've seen in history.
It creates what we call the American trajectory. It creates reproletarianization, right? And it creates, like Carlos was just saying, the possibility for the united struggle for socialism in a way that was impossible when that color line was still the primary social relation between the working classes, when it was still formalized as in law preceding an outward expression of social relations that was a separation of working people based completely in the abstract, right? Completely on nothing, on air, based on the relations people entered into all the way back in the days of chattel slavery. Martin Luther King Jr. was not fighting against America. Martin Luther Jr. was creating America, right? He wasn't from Russia. He wasn't Argentine. He wasn't Greek. He wasn't South African. He wasn't Congolese. He wasn't Yemeni. He was grown in the soil of the American proletariat. He came to us, to the people, from the pulpit of a Baptist church. If there's anything less American than that, I don't know what it is, right? This is the development of the American people and our nation in real time. And we can see it. We can see all of the evidence of King's movement pushing the entire country forward. And if you, all you have to say about that is silliness, then get out of the way. What are you doing? You're not serious about what you even say your goals are?
Absolutely. But thankfully, the working class, which is the heart and soul of the struggle for socialism, after all, socialism in its initial stages of struggle is really nothing more than the working class's conquest of political power. That's the beginning of the revolutionary process. The most militant parts of the labor movement and major unions, of course, you have the ALU and Chris Maltz, which are historic, but the UAW, headed by Sean Fain, doing some of the most extraordinary things we've seen in the labor movement for many, many, many decades, held a conference of sorts, an event on Martin Luther King Day, and it was very much imbued with the spirit of King, with the intersections of the struggle against poverty, of the struggle for the uplift of the working class, of the struggle against war, which they have been very vocal about and calling for a ceasefire for months now. And it's a struggle that they see as being in line with the tradition of King, as being in line with the tradition of the struggle against the Vietnam War, a war that, as MLK famously lets us know, created a situation where the bombs we were dropping on the Vietnamese, so on the figure that the media and the bourgeoisie wanted us to consider the other, they were actually landing in Detroit. They were landing in America. And it's the same thing today. The bombs that land in Gaza, the bombs that land in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, those bombs are landing here at home. It is not disconnected. The policies of the American empire are intimately related to the policies of the American Republic, to the national policies of the bourgeoisie. You cannot separate the two. You cannot base a party program on the basis of that separation and making the argument that, well, both parties might be the same in terms of foreign policy, but in terms of national policy, one is better, so we have to vote for that. No, that is absurd. That is a bourgeois bifurcation. As a Marxist, you see everything in its interconnection. You realize that you cannot separate the policies of empire, the crisis of empire, the geopolitical crisis of U.S. imperialism, with the crisis at home, the crisis of authority, the crisis of legitimacy, with the fact that around 80 to 90% of the people distrust their elected representatives. They distrust the media. So the leading institutions of the bourgeoisie, the electoral institutions in the field of politics, and the media institutions in the ideological fields, they reject them. The vast majority of people reject them in numbers we've never seen before. So this is an unprecedented condition that we are in the United States of America. And this moment calls for nothing more than a strong communist party, a strong communist force that can put petty, minor, secondary things aside and unite in order to bring the people together. A people that, from various different angles, have come to oppose the status quo. Some of them through the Trump angles, some of them through the Bernie angles, some of them through a form of political nihilism that is still a positive political position in terms of its rejection of the establishment. The goal today is to figure out how to unite the discontented masses that are expressing their discontent in a variety of ways, as Montero argues, some with Trump, some with RFK, some with Cornel West, with other candidates. How do you unite that into a genuine people's movement that challenges the status quo, that challenges this rule of the elite, that is bringing us to various forms of catastrophe, nuclear catastrophe, environmental catastrophe, catastrophes of poverty, of debt, that's bringing the most wretched order humanity has seen into existence. How do we unite this? And the time calls for nothing more than a communist party that has not only the theoretical capacity, but the practical flexibility to understand the regional differences the country has, and that is able to bring in people from different backgrounds, irregardless of whatever ideological position they have as a starting point, but on the basis of the fact that they are working people, that they're exploited, oppressed, that they're alienated, and that they are objectively in a position to be a positive force for revolutionary change.
1000%. And this brings me to something that just grinds my gears like nothing else. It is the middle class social chauvinism, the hyper individualist misconception that the person who is using communism sort of as a self identification or some sort of fashion statement, like it's a cool jacket they put on, right? Which is a lot of people, right? But they walk around having done nothing, having built nothing, having failed over and over and over and over and over again to even have the country know they exist, right? Looking down on everyone else. Everyone else is stupid. They know best. It's a sort of mockery and swagger from a position of nowhere and having done nothing. And it's just when we act like that, when we even smell like that, people see it and they lump us in with people like that. And so that's one of the reasons we have to rise above such a thing, right? We have to not go to people with empty swagger, but when we swagger, prove that there is a reason we swagger, right? And if we haven't built anything, well, then we ain't earned the right to swagger yet. And whenever I talk to people about this, I'm like, who do you think you are? Right? Like, why do you criticize this person as if you're Lord on high of everything correct? When I'm looking at what you're saying right now, knowing for a fact you can't tell a dialectic from a diuretic, right? And you act like Lenin or something. They're like, well, Lenin mocks people, Marx mocks people. Lenin built the fucking Bolsheviks. Marx was Karl motherfucking Marx. Right capital and then swag. But you ain't done nothing yet. So what are you doing? Build something. Build something. Prove to us that you are so much better. And I personally will follow you. If you can do that, you are proving your capacity to lead us. And so I'm there for it. That's how you earn the right to swagger. But these nobodies, these remnants of the middle class that look down on the entire working class as backwards and stupid and ignorant, and they're all bigots of so forth, of some sort, and they all, I'm in an org. I do the actual work. What actual work? The country doesn't know you exist. No actual work, which brings us to a very good topic. That if you want to go into this one first, we can, or we can slide into maybe the Trump thing, whatever you want to do, brother. What do you think?
Well, I just want to say one more thing there. You said that an argument that they often make when you criticize the petty forms of attacks that they engage in is that they say, well, Lenin and Marx did it, which is wrong in quite a few levels because it just shows how dogmatically they're treating Lenin and Marx. They're not looking at the essence of Marxism, which is this living, open, creative, developing worldview. They're looking at static conclusions. And here, not even conclusions. Here, they're just looking at the form that some of those conclusions and arguments took and using that in order to legitimize doing the same thing today, as if everything wasn't based on what, Comrade Stalin? That's your
the time conditions and I messed
time and place. Like if everything wasn't rooted in time and place, if something worked for Marx and Engels and Lenin's times, maybe it's not the form that we have to use today. Maybe we don't have to be offending comrades in the same form, or maybe we do. I don't know. I personally don't think we should. I know the Institute doesn't comport itself in such ways. With some enemies, yes. But with people who I think are genuine comrades who are just wrong, we don't comport ourselves in that way. But another interesting thing is that these people who tell you, well, Marx and Lenin, and they polemicized in these forms. Who were they polemicizing against? They were polemicizing against people whose theoretical foundations you share, Mr. Radlib. Mr. Radlib, you are the ones that Marx and Engels and Lenin would have polemicized against and made fun of. So you can't appeal to their polemization, if that's even a word. As a philosopher, I have a create word card that they give us.
Everything
So
is nation and ality and
yeah. I can just create it. But you have no right to speak of to use that argument. Oh, Marx did this against these people, so I have the right to do it, because you are the sort of person and the person with the sort of theoretical outlook that Marx and Engels and Lenin would have used that against.
Yeah, 100%. And it's absurd that what happens, and this is not their fault, right? It's a product of modern bourgeois ideology, is that they turn to Marx and Engels and Lenin and read it only to verify their preconception, right? But we know through the very, very basic first parts of the dialectic that preconception is empty, right? It's nothing. It's nothing at all. If we want to find out how that preconception works and where it came from, we need to ascend to the concrete on it, not look for excuses to verify it. And when we ascend to the concrete, we understand what builds it. Like, and you get into the distortions, you get into the fake left, you get into the entire last period of our history creating all of this, right? And so I went backwards with it rather than forwards, if you couldn't tell. But I think that when you do that, when you genuinely attempt to hold a preconception up to a ruthless interrogation rather than looking for excuses to verify it, that's the only way you can learn anything ever. And if you're not trying to learn anything, if you're really not, if you think you got it all figured out already, then you're not a revolutionary. A revolutionary gets to the root of things.
Yeah, you got to have that Socratic humility. This is a really good point from Rich. I think they're phrasing it cynically, but Noah, they're in the party and they go to protest. This brings up an excellent point, which is people often like to discourage folks, perhaps even the people who we're implicitly talking about today. They like to discourage people who do work online, as if one, those people as individuals aren't doing work in person extremely actively in parties and in other organizations, mass organizations. But as if two, every revolutionary struggle is reducible to going out and seeing the same people with the same signs every weekend. I'm sorry, protesting is great. One of the segments here, we're going to talk about the 500,000 people basically that showed up in Washington. That's excellent. But that is a tactic for a specific type of fight. What type of fight? It's a tactic for the war of maneuvers. It's a tactic for a direct assault on the ruling class. You do not win hearts and minds through protests. You do not win hearts and minds through protests. It's not, it plays some role. There's always, overlaps. But a protest is a tactic that is not within the central ones of the war of positions. It's not an important component of winning over the hearts and minds of people. And in a time where people are spending on average 7-8 hours on their phones, and where the ideological worldviews that they construct are so rooted in that activity that they have online and on social media, doing the sort of work that us and RBN and other groups are doing, educating, criticizing empire, challenging the narratives, that is more important for the war of position, for the war for the hearts and minds of the people. The most important war we need right now is to convince the masses, to construct a counter hegemony, a working class hegemony. That is more important than protesting.
Yeah.
On the whole, right? Protesting against, the genocide, yes, that might be but on the whole, for a revolutionary struggle, that winning of the hearts and minds is far more important. So people make these comparisons, and they presuppose that as an educational institute, that's primarily online, but that also does stuff in person, we're the ones that have to be taking people out into the streets. No, my friend, that's not what we are as an institute. We're an educational institute. Our task is to do what we do, which is run classes, publish books, publish articles, do broadcasts where we try to analyze various topics, promote the Marxist worldview, help people adjust their worldviews to the Marxist worldview, which is, in our view, the most correct one, the one that allows us to get at truth and organize our people. So there's so many distortions and so many unknown knowns, presuppositions that should not be there, that are guiding the way that these people interact, often with groups like us.
Yeah, I think, and even right now, we are at such a low level of people even understanding, let alone understanding Marxism on a deep enough level to really figure out good tactics in the class struggle. We're at such a point, a low point, where people don't even understand what Marxism is. And so, if we cannot understand that society, how it functions, how it changes, we can't understand how to change it, and all activism becomes nothing but a lark, in a sense. And I don't want to say spontaneous mass action, such as protests against the genocide in Palestine, or a LARP. They're not. What I'm talking about is protests as revolutionary, right? That is just spontaneous anger. And that's fine. That's all well and good. But to go that next step and actually gain the power that we need to really fight our ruling class on this issue and any other one, we are so far behind putting forward a force in the war of maneuvers that to go there is wasting time, wasting energy. And there is a reason people want you to do that. Now, I'm not saying don't protest. Of course not. We need to keep that sort of thing going, because it's also a way to sort of gauge where the public is at on certain things, right? But if you don't have any revolutionary theory, you're going to be stuck turning your wheels like that, getting manipulated by slick right opportunists who steal the words Marxism from us and tell you basically lies, and then go do something to help the Democrats, right? They're the lesser evil. They have all of our middle class values. What happened to the fucking proletariat, right? Is the far right the issue, or is the bourgeoisie the issue? Right? What does a far right even mean?
No, absolutely, brother. I think we've hammered this topic well. We have a couple great super chats here. Thank you so much, Dino Pantelucas. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. A contribution towards the work. Great discussion as always. Thank you so much, brother. As you all know, it's a people's funded institute, so these are tremendously appreciated. We literally cannot do a fraction of the stuff we do without them, man. Here's another one from the comrade of Starback, 10 euros. Sup, brothers? The Starback is perhaps the person that my comedic taste aligns the most with. You know, if our conversations ever came out, we would all be canceled. So thank you so much for the video, brothers.
I wonder how many times we've been canceled so far.
Right.
So many very suspiciously organized campaigns to cancel us. Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and it always happens such that it's like people who pretend to be on opposing sides of things, pretend to be enemies, who then come together. It's like the ultra left and the explicit right opportunists. Now they're coming together to attack the Stalinist center. Mm-hmm. But here's a really, really good question from Dea. Hi, Noah and Carlos. I have a question. Forgive me if it's not phrased best, and if it's off topic, feel free to ignore it. In a couple past streams, debate ones, I think, I've watched Noah talk about how I've watched Noah has talked about definitions and how Hegel warned against the use of them. Why should we steer away from trying to focus on definitions? And are there any resources that explain this a little more or more simply than Hegel does? You mind if I take a stab at this one real quick?
Yeah, I want to just clear up real quick. It's Engels that I'm
Engels, yeah.
referencing rather than Hegel. But yeah, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, well, what you're doing when you provide a definition, especially for something that's supposed to describe the world, is that you're almost like sucking the vitality out of it because it exists, it lives, it is actual in a world in which it is in constant movement, in constant interconnection with everything else, and in a constant referential dialectical relationship with a developing totality. If it's a social phenomenon, it's a social totality. So when you take it out for the sake of a definition, the value of the scientific assessment of the phenomenon goes down and down and down and down and down. That's the essence of it. That doesn't mean that for practical purposes we can't have definitions. Like without having at least a very basic sense of definitions, we couldn't really live. So there's a role for definitions, right? There's different fields. When you're trying to analyze scientific thinking, a different logic applies to that. When you're trying to analyze different questions of knowledge, a more basic, perhaps traditional logic applies to that, and conjoined to that, a more basic understanding of definitions. But for the more complex analysis, the more scientific, the more comprehensive, when you're analyzing the concrete, so the more comprehensive, that understanding of definitions as these static entities really has to go. I mean, think about how Marx approaches the questions of commodity. He doesn't just sit there and tell you this is the definition of a commodity. Boom, that's it. Book is over. So many of the debates that have occurred in Marxist scholarship have been, well, Marx didn't give us a definition of class. Marx didn't give us a definition of this. Yeah, because you can't fucking accurately describe something scientifically if you're just giving a couple sentence definition for it. He unfolds it dialectically. He ascends to the concrete in a way that traces the logical development of that thing he is describing. It is up to you to read it and not to come out with a simple definition, but to understand it as a process, as an evolving process. So he gives us the germ of capitalist production, the commodity, and then he develops it and concretizes it over 3 volumes. Yes, for the sake of perhaps teaching militants, you can reduce it and have more definition-like ways of approaching the thing. But the goal is to educate them to the point of understanding that that's only step 1, baby. You have to get to step 10. You have to concretize, because knowledge is itself a dialectical process of concretizing. So definitions might be good for the beginning, but your goal should be to work towards an understanding of the role that definitions play at one moment, but the role that they also play in sucking the thing that they're describing out of the vitality and the dynamism in which it exists in.
Yeah, I would only add that Engels says to just remember when you're forced to use definitions, never forget their limitations, right?
Right.
Understand a thing in its process. Like Carlos said, the commodity is where the logic of capital begins for a reason, right? And the development of society through this is through all these specific points for a reason, right? When people say Marx never gave us a definition of this, Marx never gave us a definition of that, it's because they're not thinking dialectically. They're just not. And this is why we're always talking about we need American Marxism, right? Because that necessity of having a definition is part of the problem. Not that I don't want to blame anyone for this, by the way. Like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, we need to be asking the exact questions that was it Dea just asked. That's the perfect question. Yeah. Rather than complaining that Marx didn't give us a definition, so we need to make up a definition. No, there's a reason. You don't think Karl fucking Marx was like, whoa, I didn't give them a definition. They're gonna no. There's a reason for everything he did.
And Hegel doesn't come out explicitly and talk about definitions in this way, but he does it with other things that are homologous to what definitions are. If you look at, any of his texts on logic, whether it's the lectures on logic, whether it's the science of logic, whether it's the first part of the encyclopedia, every time he is addressing a concept, he tears it apart.
Carlos, what about
Shows
the lectures on the history of philosophy?
not that one specifically. That one he's doing it with the history of philosophy. But in terms of the logical development of concepts into other concepts that are more refined, that solve whatever apparent contradiction was in the previous one, right? So this understanding of the fluidity of the description of various things and their the way in which you can't just fixate an understanding of a thing through a definition. That is apparent. That is implicit in the work of Hegel, the logical work, right? So if you're, there's people that go ahead and when they're just getting started, they'll read like the first part, and then they'll make this big generalizational or generalized abstraction about what Hegel says about this, and because they don't see it unfold into what it unfolds into, they don't describe that moment, that initial moment in the logical development of the concept. They don't describe it correctly. They don't fully understand it because they haven't seen what it unfolds into. Just like a cocoon, you don't understand it. Is it a cocoon? What's the pre-stage of a butterfly? It's a cocoon, right?
Yeah, it's a cocoon. By the way, speaking, I have to run into a cocoon for like 3 minutes. I'll be right back.
You don't understand a cocoon fully if you don't see what it is unfolding itself into. Now, this applies for Hegel. This applies for Marxism as well, right? You have in Capital, the 3-4 volumes of Capital, you have a conceptual development such that the concepts that appear later on, in order to understand those, you need the concepts that appear before that. It's a necessary logical sequence. You couldn't understand, for instance, the distinction between absolute and relative surplus value if you don't understand value, exchange value, use value, etc. So they concretize, they build themselves up so that as he starts volume 3 saying, now the thing that we're going to be describing looks more and more like the social totality that we have in front of us because it's the most comprehensive, the most concrete. But it goes the other way around as well, right? You don't fully understand the first few categories, the commodity, use, and exchange value, etc., if you don't understand what it develops into. So it works both ways. If the example I always bring up is like, you can't understand fully the first Godfather movie if you're not seeing it in its unfolding into the second and the third part, right? And clearly you can't understand the second and the third part if you haven't seen the first part. So it's dialectical, and that should always be kept in mind. Yeah, I don't know. Noah's going somewhere. I don't know where he's going. Let me see. Okay, he needs help, some family-related stuff. So I don't want to go to the next segment without Noah, but let's see if there's any questions here in the chat. We had a good one that we had started before. Okay. Karl fucking Marx, yeah. John Bechtel for US president, Jesus. Demanding a definition first. Oh, there he is. And then imposing the definition onto reality's textbook idealism. Yeah, it's just there's this really good word that Engels uses to criticize Hegel, I think sometimes unfairly, but he says foist. You're foisting things onto reality. And he explicitly tells us that dialectics is not foisting things onto nature or society. It's on the basis of a concrete assessment of those things, deducing its dialectical movement. And if the concrete assessment of those things requires you to adjust your method, you should do that as well. That's something that Engels makes very explicit. And Lassalle, he writes a book on Heraclitus. And Marx reads it. He sends a letter to Engels. And he tells him, you know what Lassalle is doing here? He's foisting dialectics onto the world. And he'll find pretty soon the difference that exists between letting the world unfold its dialectical character to you through the concrete study of the world versus foisting in this very idealist form dialectics onto the world. One path is the path of truth. The other path is the path of dogmatism.
it becomes this very mechanistic form of idealism too, right? That thinks it is materialist, but in this definition mongering, as I call it, becomes idealist, like Maria said. I also want to note that a lot of debate bro types will force people to give a definition. And when they do this, it's a trick, right? Because definitions defy context. They, by their nature, they are anti-contextual. But everything we talk about is always within a real context, in the
Yeah.
real world. If we're talking about the real world, we are talking about context and things that cannot be removed from context. And so when they ask you for, they go, well, what's your definition of socialism? First of all, you say socialism has no definition. That's your answer. You say socialism is just that next thing. As it develops, what we do is study how a society develops. And then we come to the conclusion that, oh, of course, socialism comes next. We don't go from the idea to reality. We go from reality to the idea and then back to reality.
Back
Also,
to life, back to reality. I don't even know where that's from. It's just in there.
song from the 90s, back to reality.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a jam. I was drinking ketchup, Cobra.
Nice, nice. That's what the folks do in the Midwest to warm up.
Yeah, we drink
2
ketchup.
bottles. Yes. You know, we have this expression.
Oh, sweet.
I started class this morning by letting the students know of this Cuban expression we use for when it's cold. We say in Spanish, "Está chiflando el mono," which translates to the monkey's whistling, which is the stupidest expression you could probably have for the cold weather. But, man.
In Cleveland, I don't know if there's like these jokes everywhere, but my dad was always very fond of saying that it's so cold you could eat your wife. I don't know if that's him or here or whatever. He also would do that very dad joke like, it's Cleveland. You don't like the weather? Wait 5 minutes. You know, one thing I really liked, I don't know why I'm on this, but their generation, right? The boomers, how they used to call things bad boys. I very much like that. Like my dad would be at the grill, like, hey, no, throw me one of those bad boys. I'll put
Oh,
one of
yeah,
those
yeah.
bad boys on the grill for you, right? Everything was a bad boy. I don't know why, but it was good.
Yeah, we got to bring a Freudian in here to analyze that. But especially that reference of eating your wife in the cold. It shouldn't just be, I'm not going to make a sexual joke about it. I promise. I'm not going to be obscene here. Justin Watson, thank you so much, brother, for the $5 super chat. Just a contribution for discussing the Marxist method in a way I think about a lot, but struggle to verbalize at times. Love the idealism discussion. Thank you so much, brother. By the way, if you're interested, I did a video some time ago explaining how Bob Ross is a master dialectician. I think that was the title of it, but it's it's one of these attempts that I make at explicating these truths that Marxism allows us to understand in a way that connects to things that are fairly commonsensical and that help people understand this worldview, which is the most advanced one that humanity has seen thus far.
Yeah, and it's well beyond. By the way, Carlos has a really great new article up, well, newish article on his Substack about the ascension of the concrete. I suggest y'all check out. It's very good, and very easy to grasp. But beyond all that, it's sort of, you know what? I'm not going to get into a whole thing. Go on, let's keep trucking. We're already an hour in. There it is. Look at those guys. You are muted, Carlos.
Oh, this is the one that Noah was talking about. I'll link it to the chat. It's a public article. Um, but yeah, anyone interested in supporting my work, you can sign up for the price of a cappuccino, as I've been fond of saying, a month. So um, I yeah, it definitely helps me
You
at the
get
end
a
of the
lot of
month when
women in their
what
early 20s signing up, drinking cappuccino. Old Italian men.
I'm really trying to get the Italian donations up here with the
Mm.
cappuccino effort. I got to come up with another one. But yeah, if you want to help support my work and help support me financially, just consider doing that for $5. There's different memberships. There's like a $30 one for the year, and there's this membership that's called Founding Member, where you get to suggest to me what you want me to write about. Then that's like $240. So if you really got it and you want to help, consider doing that. If you want to help the institute, which I think you should also, if you have anything extra that you want to give to the cause, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/MidwesternMarx. By the way, for anyone watching, if you have a series of emails, subscribe to the Philosophy in Crisis Substack of mine. You can subscribe for free. It adds numbers to the subscriber count, and it boosts me in the Substack algorithm. So if you want to help your boy, make sure to do that. But the next segment, I think, which one do you want to touch on next, Noah? I think the Mark Lamont Hill speech is going to be fairly short to watch, but
Do it up, brother.
so this is Mark Lamont Hill. I felt like I've seen him before, but I didn't know of him until uh, the intensification of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians started in October 7th. But he's been
By the way,
extremely outspoken.
let me say before we go into this, the hotspot is fantastic. It's Nico House, Nick from RBN, just great people
Yeah,
running that thing, and they put out amazing stuff. So if you're not subscribed to them, very much do so. And speaking of RBN, I'm going to be on Nick's show tomorrow at noon, so check it out.
oh yeah. By the way, the price of a pumpkin spice latte, that should be my marketing tool for suburban white women.
You know, not that we're in the suburbs, far from it, but a coffee shop just opened up, like literally a block from my house this way, which is amazing. And they're the coolest place ever. It's a family owned business, and it's a husband and wife, and they have this adorable like 1-year-old daughter that just hangs out in there and plays with toys all day, right? And we were in there, and she was like playing with a toy cell phone and pretending to take pictures one day with my wife and myself, right? And then she goes in the other day, and uh, and she goes, "Where's your friend?" Talking about me because I was at home, right? And so that's step one. Step two, I go in there a few days after that. She goes, "Where's your mom at?" Thinking that my wife was my mom, of course. That's a good
That's
question
complicated.
because we are cosplaying each other.
Yes, yes.
Mhm. I'm a
It's so
huge
funny because
Carlos Gordito cosplayer.
yeah,
We do an event once a year. If you're interested in coming, we all grow our beards like that, and we get those little hats. And
yes.
it's a good time. It's a good time. Please come out. Consider donating.
Yeah, it's funny, and I'm only joking about this because you're my best friend, and I know you don't take it hardly, but you look so extremely young for your age. You look like you could be younger than me, and I've often told you that you got to have a anti-aging program where you tell people, well, the way I got to stay young was becoming a heroin addict and then going clean. That'll do it. That's how you stay young. That's how you stay looking like 18 for the next 35 years of your life. But back to a serious note. Here's Mark Lamont Hill. I mean, do you know who Mark Lamont Hill is, Noah?
Vaguely,
Yeah,
but I know he's a badass.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and I've seen this video and it's fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen Danny share a lot of his stuff, especially since October 7th. I've liked everything I've seen. He's pretty awesome. But
Yeah.
you guys are gonna love this one. It's extremely moving.
They opened the pulpit up to Genocide Joe.
By the
I
way,
can get mad, I don't care.
Genocide Joe is a nickname coined by our friend and yours, Nick Cruz from Revolutionary Blackout Network. And I love that it's caught on.
Yeah, yeah.
Nick is king of, like, he is better at nicknames than Trump. And that's saying something.
Ron the Sanctimonious.
That they opened the pulpit up to Genocide Joe. Y'all can get mad, I don't care. And people, as he began to give his campaign speech, some protesters stood up and said, "Stop the blood in Palestine." Yeah, yeah. They said, if you're outraged by the blood of Selma and you're outraged by the blood that was spilled in this very church, then how about calling for a ceasefire in Palestine, since you've given them the weapons, you giving them the support, you giving them the money? Joe, why don't you do something about it? They marched and stood up and got kicked out of the church, and people said, we're outraged. You know, I was outraged too. How dare you use this sacred space? How dare you use this beloved pulpit? How dare you use this sacred tradition? How dare you use the words of Jesus, who overturned the tables in the temple, who was committed to overturning a Roman government, who was committed to speaking out against injustice? How dare you use this space as a shield for imperial war? How dare you use this space as a shield for violence? How dare you use this space as a shield for genocide?
Ooh.
Woo!
My God.
Right?
It's so beautiful, and it reminds me of that quote that that Lenin gives us at the beginning of the State and Revolution, where he talks about how they've distorted Marx and how it comes to a point where a revolutionary that's hated by the elite becomes so popular that the elite have to domesticate them, castrate them, and then feed them back to the people. And that's what they've done with MLK. Again, we started the stream talking about the legacy of MLK, and he was considered the most dangerous man in the country. And now the elite has had to castrate him in order to celebrate a figure that is in the hearts and souls of the American people forever, and that is in many ways the spiritual guiding energy, spirit for the struggles that a lot of us are waging today. So when they, at a day where they're supposed to be celebrating King, use it, as Mark Lamont Hill mentioned, as a shield for these crimes that King would have been amongst the protesters in protesting, it just shows the hypocrisy of the ruling class and how very blatantly they attempt to absorb caricatures that they have created of these figures in order to distort them into something that is often unrecognizable. The first critic of Joe Biden in this day would have been Martin Luther King Jr. The first critic of Israeli Zionist genocide would have been Martin Luther King Jr. Even though he had whatever views he had about Zionism in his day, those would have certainly changed had he seen what Zionism developed into.
And I think it's important that we remember that last thing Carlos just said. People these days are taught to cancel people for that. They would cancel MLK for that these days. I guarantee you there's people saying that. Or people that talk about, well, MLK was this, MLK was that, who can't understand the revolutionary significance of King and why we say that he represents the American spirit. Why a little bit of, look, well, we're communists, so we, of course, admire and respect Lenin. We, of course, admire and respect Marx and Stalin and Mao and Che Guevara and all of these great figures. But Martin Luther King is ours.
Yeah.
He's ours, right? That is the same soul that propelled him forward is the soul that must propel us forward in our era. That is the tradition we come out of as American revolutionaries, right? And it goes all the way back. That spirit has always existed in this country. Before him, there was Du Bois, right? There was Debs, there was Foster, there was the entire trade union movement, there was the abolition movement, there was John Brown, there was Harriet Tubman. Before him, there was Thomas Jefferson, even in a way, right? There was Thomas Paine. There were all of these people that represented the future, right? You know how they used to say communists are people from the future, arrived from the future? Now, there's a whole logic behind why they said that, but this is what it is, right? We are living in the day that gave rise to King, and so he gives rise to us. Yeah, I don't know.
You can even take it to the pre-1776 with
Exactly.
Roger Williams. Roger Williams came here and was kicked out. Yeah, well, Roger Williams was one of the original, I guess, settlers, but here in a correct sense, the first people that settled here. And he completely challenged whatever supremacist notions were developing amongst the early colonists who, were literally lifting themselves up as ontologically superiors to others, especially in relationship to the indigenous. And Roger Williams affirmed that revolutionary Christian tradition of we are all the sons of God, we are all human beings, we're all equal. And for that, he was kicked out, excommunicated from his community. I think he went back to another one. I believe it was Massachusetts or something. But again, there's been, wherever there's struggle, wherever there's oppression, wherever there's exploitation, there are going to be the poles that defend that horrendous mode of life. And then there's going to be the poles that are fighting against it on the basis of their own necessity and their own material conditions. So that dialectical character of social movement has to be kept in mind. But let's listen to this other part.
That they opened the pulpit up to. The moral atrocity that took place wasn't some disruptive protesters. It was the fact that you allowed the leader of the most violent and bloody empire in modern history to stand in this place and represent a tradition that he ain't got nothing to do with. How dare you?
Bro, that's one of the most badass speeches I have seen this year, and there are a lot of them. It's been a year that has produced amazing speeches from Cornel West, George Galloway, Claire Daly, Mick Wallace, a lot of other folks. I'm probably missing quite a few, but god damn was that good.
Yeah. I think we're in a new era. We are. And we talk about this a lot, but what is the force propelling all of this? What animates this man to speak with such passion? It's necessity, right? There is a necessity for change, so it creates the people capable of carrying out that change. Now, that doesn't mean we sit back and take a passive role in this. That one got me, Cobra. But we don't sit back and take a passive role. We take a fucking act. I'm swearing a lot. I apologize. But we take a fucking active role in that. We take responsibility for that change, right? It's not that, we wish things were better. Let's get a reform. Let's, beg the capitalist class to give us a dignified life. Our responsibility, our duty to our community, to our family, to our country, to all of it, to the entire international proletariat, is to fight that ruling class. We've tried asking nicely. So what are we going to do now? People are getting pissed, like him, for a reason. So what's the next step? Right? What is the next step from there? We could all just, shout. Or what is he doing? He's preaching in an organized manner to the people. He is winning hearts and minds. That is all over the internet right now. Guarantee you, the passion and strength in that speech won people over. So what we need to do is develop the same sort of thing. And as we all do this separately, begin connecting it. Begin getting people together and figuring out, we all know this needs to change. So what do we do about it now? How do we create a concretization of the anti-monopoly coalition in 2024?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that bringing back the anti-monopoly coalition is going to be so important for our day and age.
Well, let me just real quick interrupt you, Carlos. Because even understanding that anti-monopoly coalition, we always go back to this one little quote from Lenin, that you cannot have a revolutionary movement without the most advanced revolutionary theory. And people don't really think about that statement. It's not just revolutionary theory. It's the most advanced revolutionary theory. Meaning, why did the Bolsheviks win? Because they saw what Marx had done, right? Advancing from Hegel, Hegel advancing from Kant, Kant advancing from Descartes, all of these advancements. And they advanced past Marx into their own era, right? And that is how they won. They had the most advanced theory. And so that brings us to American Marxism. Creating that most advanced theory in our era means two things. One, getting real Marxism again, right? Real Marxism, not copying the conclusions of Lenin, not using their names and attacking real Marxists for, not being pure enough for you, or attacking anyone for not being pure enough for you, right? And then two, applying our theory to our more developed era and creating this most advanced revolutionary theory. And this is going to bring us to something incredibly important. What lays the groundwork for Marx to do his work, right? Why couldn't Hegel have the insights of Marx? Certainly he was capable of them. It's because he was limited by his epoch, as Engels points out, right? Marx, limited by his epoch, as Lenin points out. All of these limitations of epoch, right? So Marx comes into being at the advent of industrial capitalism. We're seeing the steam engine, the spinning jenny, things of this nature, right? We're here in the full development of financialization, AI, computer production. There are robots in factories and people overseeing them now. This is a whole new ball game, and we need to understand how this process develops using dialectical logic, right? And this brings us to new things happening, right? It brings us to the relationship working people who are creating no surplus value over a giant section of the economy, service sector workers, professionals, etc. Right? It leads us there. It leads us to tech production. It leads us to them in contradiction with finance, right? Second form of exploitation, debt taking on a primary importance. It leads us to computer production. And this is what I really want to get into, because Carlos wrote a paper recently, and it made me have to go back and reassess a part of my reproletarianization paper, which I did, by the way, because what he brings up are these two concepts, absolute and triple exploitation. And I want you to explain them, Carlos, because it's your concept. But I just want to say that understanding this is understanding the forces of production outmoding the relations of production. This is precisely what Marx was witnessing, a lower form of, right? A less developed form of. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So I wrote this maybe a week ago, a little bit over a week ago. It was jotting down ideas that I've had for quite a while, and I encountered a statistic from Harvard Business Review that talked about the fact that the industries that are collecting and selling data are making 200 billion in profits, and it's only going up. That was 3-4 years ago. It's gone substantially up since then. So it lead me to think like, well, where is this profit coming from? What is it that they're selling? Well, it's very clear that they're selling data. It says it in the name. What they're collecting and selling is data. But what's that data? Where does it come from? Does it just stem out of a void and they just capture it from the void and then sell it? No, that data is produced by us. It is our activity when we are in what we would consider leisure or working. But whenever we're interacting with technology, whether it's our computers or our phones, this is collecting data. And all of this data is then sold. So it's an interaction between an activity that us as individuals are doing, and exertion of energy and maybe you could call it labor power upon a form of fixed capital that's in our hand, which would be the technology that is creating something new. So it's, again, this dialectical interaction between human activity, nature, and the previous tools that humanity has created that produces something new, this time something intangible called data, that is then sold for hundreds of fucking billions of profits. So I don't know what else to call that if not exploitation. When we're producing this data, we're producing that which then gets sold and realized into these hundreds of billions of dollars of profit, which is immense, an immense percentage of the profits made by the capitalist class. It's a central way of making profit today. So I was thinking about it, and if you go back to the Marxist classics, there's this way to mathematize, to understand exploitation as a rate of exploitation, where you have at the top of the fraction. Yeah, go ahead. No.
Let me just real quick point out the relationship between logic and mathematics is huge, right? Like mathematics is used specifically in order to verify things logically, right? I just wanted to point that out because it's something we don't think about often, and we should. But go ahead, brother. I'm sorry to interrupt.
You have the rate of exploitation, which is understood as the top is the amount of the surplus hours that you're working, the surplus labor time that you're exerting your labor power in, and the bottom is the necessary labor time that you're actually paid for. And out of that fraction, the what results out of the calculation of that fraction is the rate of exploitation. Well, you're not paid for producing data. It is often the opposite. You're the one that has to pay for your Wi-Fi. Sometimes you produce data by being in websites that have paywalls. So sometimes it's even the opposite. You're the one that's paying for the denominator. So you're not even getting paid. So when the denominator is zero, when you're not getting paid at all, but you're producing something when you're producing surplus value that gets realized into hundreds of billions of dollars in profits, and the denominator is zero, you're getting paid nothing. Mathematically, the term would be undefined. That's what an undefined equation fraction would look like. But we have in the Marxist tradition, and specifically Marxist discussions on the categories of absolute and relative surplus value, we have this concept of absolute as being a prolongation of the time of work. And I sat down and thought about it, and I was like, well, shit. What we have here is absolute exploitation. Is exploitation getting to perhaps its most parasitic stage ever, where we're not even paid? We don't even know that we're working. I have a quote here at the end. The wage labor at least knows he is working, and then at a certain point in the development of class consciousness, the wage labor recognizes, well, I'm exploited. It doesn't have to be this way. I could have a revolution. The data producer, on the other hand, we think we're resting. We think we're just enjoying a good death scroll. So we don't even know that we're producing, much less that we are paying to literally be exploited. So that is what I'm calling absolute exploitation. It is a new form of exploitation that is playing a quite significant role in the profits of the modern technological capitalist class, specifically in the field of collecting and selling data. And there's other components to this, but I'll let Noah speak for a bit.
Yeah, the really brilliant part of this, and what really made me sit up and go, holy shit, right? This is big. Is how this zero denominator becomes absolute, goes from undefined to absolute, because it first appears as zero, as nothing, right? But as this value is realized, it becomes whatever that top number, the numerator, is in the equation at 100% or more, because of the subscription fees we're paying and rent. So there is the financial aspect to think of, right? The rents they're seeking, the monopolization. And then their 100% profit rate on top of that. And so the undefined, as it is realized, as they're actually accumulating, becomes absolute. It is realized as like Carlos said, the perfect term for it, absolute exploitation. And this is what everything revolves around, why we need that most advanced revolutionary theory, because we can't apply cold, dead dogmas that we get from Marx, even the brilliant insights of Marx, to this. This is a new thing.
Yeah.
Right? We need
no, absolutely. Yeah.
We need to instead apply Marx's method, the same way he looks at the advent of industrial capitalism and capitalism being the sort of forces of production outmoding the old relations of production. This is what we're witnessing, but in the capitalist epoch, because this is a new thing. Boss and worker doesn't make sense here anymore. Right? This is a new thing developing. It's just like the relation between the reproletariat and the financier. It's a new thing. And so we need this. We need the term, the absolute exploitation. We need to understand it if we are to fight against it.
Right. It's society at large getting exploited in this manner by a very small group of data collecting and selling capitalists. And it's extremely parasitic. Again, the people being exploited are not only not paid for it, but they often have to pay to be exploited in their time of leisure, which is another interesting thing, because it's the exertion of the labor power that produces the data that functions as surplus value to get realized into profit. That exertion is, because we're not working, is done in our leisure time primarily. So it's like labor taking the form of leisure. So that is a whole new level of complexity um, within the operation of exploitation in our highly technological capitalist world. And as I mentioned in introducing it, there's a million debates about AI and technology and all these different things. I haven't seen any that discusses how exploitation has taken this brand new form because of these technological developments. And on the basis of this being a new form, I argue that we have to be thinking today about capitalism as a system of triple exploitation. We have, of course, the primary exploitation, as Marx calls it, in the usual moment of production where you're going to work and you have that basic exploitation that Marx describes in the first volume of Capital. Then you have the exploitation that takes the form of debt, which Marx calls in the third volume of Capital secondary exploitation. He says it runs parallel to the primary exploitation taking place in the production process itself. This has generalized in unprecedented ways. Everyone is dealing with debt slavery or debt exploitation today, as Marx would call it, secondary exploitation. And then we have tertiary exploitation, or the triple exploitation, or a triad of exploitation, which is the one that is based on absolute exploitation, on the selling of data that society produces for the profits of a very small group of collecting and selling data capitalists. And I think that,
Let me,
go ahead, Noah, before I go to the next section, which is
yeah, that's why I want to stop you before that, because I think triple exploitation is a great way to look at the entire world system. And this is one of the reasons I think a very broad-based coalition and working with a lot of groups collectively on what is going to become this American Marxism is going to really help us with. Think about internationally. Think about radicalized concepts, right? Her material nations concept, right? And the focus on global geopolitics, because global geopolitics operates on this first form of exploitation primarily. Commodity production is still generalized globally, right? And most of the production is done either in the communist world, the anti-imperialist bloc in some way, or other tricontinental countries, right? The debt slaves of the IMF and things of like that, right? The second form is to continue that first form, but it becomes primary in the imperialist nations, right? They need to continue the consumption, and so debt enters the picture. They need to continue, more importantly, speculation, and so even more debt enters the picture. And the portfolios become primary rather than the commodity production as deindustrialization hits these nations. I'm talking about the US, England, France, all the Germany, all the old ones. Though Europe is currently really falling apart on that end, but neither here nor there. And then you have this absolute exploitation, which hits the imperialist nations hard as well. And so what you see is an alignment of class forces in a way that really was impossible when we had a middle class.
Yeah.
And I don't know. To me, this seems like the most optimistic thing we could even hope for. This is potential, right? And all the people that are, national nihilists, and you can't have socialism in a settler colony, like, don't talk about Cuba. Don't talk about how Russia was all stolen land or any of that, right? We'll be quiet on that, but America is different, right? But they don't have this more advanced revolutionary theory, so they can't see this potential, this alignment of interest. And that's why, again, we need this most advanced revolutionary theory. Sorry for the rant.
Yeah, I just to make clear, because someone asked here, there's the companies collect the data that we produce and then sell it to other companies so that they know how to advertise to us so that we consume their product. So that's who they're selling it to. And the weird thing is that not only are we not paid for it, but oftentimes what is sold presupposes the making of it in many ways. I have a quote somewhere around here. Can the labor that produced the data even be considered a commodity if it was never bought, at least not from the producer, nor before what they produced was already sold? And if it was never bought, in what terms can we best describe the data gathering capitalist sale of it? So again, I think I'm treading new fields here. So I think it's an important concept for understanding the various forms that capitalist exploitation, the triad of forms that capitalist exploitation is taking today. But there's another component to it as well, which is rooted in my extension of the analysis from Hans-Georg Moeller and Paul D'Ambrosio, and you and your profile, Identity After Authenticity, where they argue that at the individual level, at the level of constructing our identities, they're deeply rooted in our profiles and in curating our profile and in this dialectical interaction between what we post and the positive feedback loops that we obtain from the reaction of what we post from the general peer. So in the past, I've developed on this in my article, Imperialism and Prophilicity, where I talk about the capitalist control over social media, what that does at the level of propaganda and mental manipulation, ideological manipulation. And I go deeply into the example of Bolivia and how bot accounts were used to obtain consent. And it's an article that I recommend you all to read. But in this one, I want to access something else, which is that, the predictive capacities of these technologies are fucking insane. They can predict before a woman even knows that she's pregnant. There's so many things that they can predict where, like, the level of intimacy that they come to know you in is much greater than even your bestest of friends who you share everything with. There's even data being produced by Wi-Fi routers. I cite a study that talks about how Wi-Fi routers are able to reconstruct on the basis of the signals that they capture, basically images, such that the Wi-Fi's could potentially function if desired as cameras that could see through walls and can reconstruct through artificial intelligence technology what is going on, almost to the level of like a camera recording you. So they gather all this data, and what they're gathering and selling is your identity with a level of intimacy that not even your bestest of friend comes to know you in. And I think that at the level of how despotic, how authoritarian, for lack of a better word, how dictatorial, a word that's more so in our tradition, how dictatorial the ruling class has become, it has never been this bad. These companies, as I mentioned here, these companies have the power to watch us in our moments of leisure, a power unmatched in the history of class society. No despot of any ruling class in history has ever penetrated the lives of the exploited and oppressed with such profundity. Unlike in the old days, the security state, as some call it, the deep state, no longer needs to come within any proximity of your cell phone, the device through which we curate our identities, to tap it. The security state doesn't even need to come into your house to place cameras to spy on you. As has been shown through various studies, advanced artificial intelligence is capable of turning routers into cameras that see through walls. And that's a specific quote from a scholarly paper that's cited in the study that I linked. So, dystopian novels, the novels of the last century, are no match for the reality of 21st century capitalism. Barbarism is already here, and only socialism can dig us out of it.
And I think that last bit is so important, because realize who these people are that have access to this technology, that are using this technology, right? And when you think about that and the level of how advanced it is, excuse me, ultra left Maoist LARPs just become silly, right? If we need, first of all, this technology needs taken from their hands. It needs exposed to the public, and the public is everyone is the only people you can trust with it, because you can't trust anyone with it. right? And so if we're thinking about how to genuinely do that, the whole like, blowing up your neighbor's swing set or carrying AR-15s around to do security at some lib protest, all that kind of stuff has become counterproductive. We need to be serious about a political solution, because if you're doing that kind of thing, they already know it. If you don't understand what I'm saying, they can reconstruct what you're doing through your router, right? That is gigantic based on what you're putting out there as your profile and all of that stuff. These AIs are so much more advanced than like Chat GPT and the other fake shit we're given, right? So like, what we need to do is be professional, be realistic, and figure out a way to get people together. There is no other way to do it. None.
Absolutely, man. And for those libertarians that are always talking about Big Brother, that's should give you a good reason. Who do you want this socially produced data to be controlled and profited by? Do you want it to be a small group of people, or do you want it to be, democratically controlled by society itself for the purpose of serving society and improving our lives, not just exploiting us in our times of leisure? So. Noah, do you want to go to the next segment? And if so, which one? I see one down here that you put in about the PMC and the middle class.
That was the thing we were talking about on the phone earlier. I just sent you a private chat that you obviously didn't see.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Funny, but that's okay. We can talk about whatever you want, brother. We're running against the 2-hour mark here.
Yeah,
and usually it is almost 9:30. I'd be out of gas, but I drank 2 cups of coffee on stream, so I'm good to go.
There we go.
Let's talk about Trump next. Even if we don't hit the PMC thing and the whole.
Well, we hit it. We kind of hit it with the first discussion on MLK.
I think that's good enough. We don't need to call them out directly. They know who they are. And they know what they're doing. And
I'm sure the people listening will recognize it when they see it as well.
I just want to one last thing on that, and we're going to move on to Trump. People more and more, because of this necessity, see through that kind of nonsense, right? Because of this necessity, all of that, so-and-so is a Fed, and so-and-so is a grifter, so-and-so is an op, so-and-so is a Pat Soak, or whatever the hip lefty buzzword is for the week. People see through that and they hate it. The only people it appeals to are the people doing it, which is a very small handful of wreckers and things like that. So just my advice, learn Marxism. You get that method, that outlook, and you can see through anything. You don't need to believe someone claiming someone's a grifter or an op. You can ascend to the concrete on what they're doing.
Think for yourself.
Yeah.
Back to Yankov. Schools should teach students how to think. Don't just listen to other people. Think for yourself. And that goes for you listening to us. Think for yourself. Read the text for yourself.
I've actually been reading a lot of Ilyenkov again recently. I'm like halfway through Dialectical Logic again, which is one of the best books of all time. And his insights about Spinoza, and I don't want to get on it. So let's move on to Donald Trump. Everybody's been talking about Trump lately because let's be real. He is not part of the establishment, but he is not anti-establishment, right? He is what I refer to him as a wild card. That is why the establishment doesn't like him, because they can't control him. Trump has this entire movement of the proletariat, and let's call it a mixture of the democratic and non-democratic petty bourgeoisie in the old term, and a mixture of middle class people, right? The MAGA movement. They're all up in arms now and realizing that our system is not democratic because they're trying to prevent their guy running for president again, right? So let's say he wins. What happens then? What happens if Donald Trump wins? Well, what happens if he loses? That's a whole nother bag of bananas. But let's be real. Unless they throw him in prison, he ain't going to lose. The Democrats have nothing, and we're not organized enough yet to put forward a working class candidate. So, when Donald Trump wins, what happens when, again, he doesn't make America great again? He doesn't drain the swamp. He doesn't bring production back. He doesn't end the proxy war. He doesn't end the genocide. And it's business as usual, and he governs like a neocon. What happens when, at the end of those 4 years, nothing has changed, things have continued to deteriorate? What happens to MAGA? What happens to his movement and the people that believed he would bring positive change for all our lives? One, okay, and here's my thinking. We don't need people to condemn it, right? This was my thinking back in the day. We don't. At that point, they are going to be convinced that maybe the system isn't the answer to the system. Maybe we need something more than just a president who's going to try to fight for us, do as best as he can, and then fail. Right? And that you don't even need to get into Trump not really being anti-establishment at that point. You can just let people have their preconceptions. It doesn't matter. What matters at that point is, what do we do now? You want to drain that swamp, so do I. How do we go about it? Obviously, getting your man elected wasn't the answer. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I wanted to bring up an article from the Revolution Report that's really good. We have it listed to be republished this week at the Institute, but they make some excellent points. You know, some of the forefront of the class struggle in the U.S. has been the struggle for democratic bourgeois rights and for universalizing those, specifically amongst various groups that have been historically left out, whether it's non-property holders first, and then black people, and then women. So the struggle for the basic bourgeois civil liberties is not just a secondary one. It's a pretty important struggle that we have made tremendous advancements in, and that has made the class struggle, as the Leninist position has always told us, it's made it more acute. We can no longer blame the condition of various parts of the proletariat on simply, various forms of non-class-based inequalities that exist in a divided social order, separated by racial hierarchies, sexual hierarchies, etc. Now it becomes, as we win these struggles for civil liberties, it becomes more acute. It becomes clearer the class character of the central antagonism that moves society. So, these attacks on Trump, the lawfare, perhaps we could call it, against Trump, are serious. Regardless of what you think of Trump, he was never tried successfully for an insurrection. So the premise that they're using to prevent him from running for office is a violation of the 14th Amendment. So we have to take this serious, because it's been communists that have been at the forefront of the struggle for these civil liberties, specifically since the beginning of the 20th century. And before that, it was the forces that were at the forefront of the struggle, making those fights. So again, you have a similar basic democratic right removed from Lincoln, as they argue here in the 1860 election. Lincoln was arbitrarily and unconstitutionally barred from the ballot in almost the entire South. This was due to Lincoln's refusal to countenance the cannibalistic expansion of American slavery. That's why you have that transition from the Cotton Kingdom to the attempt to build a cotton empire, which ultimately is the political economy that produces the Civil War. For this, the 1860 election was thoroughly rigged against the progressive Lincoln. And then you have another example here with presidency campaign of William Z. Foster and James Ford in 1932, where in a lot of southern states, they were barred from being on the ballots because of the centrality of the anti-racist struggle, the struggle against Jim Crow, and other struggles that were being upheld by the communists. So the history of those who have been repressed in their attempts to be on the ballot and become president is one where you're siding literally with the people that have fought against slavery, the people that have fought against Jim Crow, and for racial equality, for the expansion of civil liberties to disenfranchised communities, specifically the Black community and the Black freedom movement, which is at the soul of such struggle. So, it's an attack on Trump, but it sets a precedent for greater attacks on us, because yes, the ruling class understands Trump as its most immediate enemy right now. That's why it's doing this. It's not doing this to anyone else. It's not doing it to Bernie Sanders or to AOC. It's doing it to Trump. But if we're able to successfully grab a hold of our moment and build an actually anti-establishment movement, communist movement, it will do it much stronger to us. So we shouldn't be shooting ourselves in the foot, clapping for the repression, fascistic repression of a misguided but yet somewhat popular movement of discontented people that is voiced through the figure of Trump, but which in many ways goes well beyond Trump, who, in his 4 years in office, I think was pretty consistent with the previous 8 years, and then the previous 8 years of Bush. So, but your thoughts, Noah?
Yeah, I think Engels says that you can't tell the people political lessons. They must experience them for themselves. Society, social reality must unfold. People need to learn these things. And this is what's going on right now. This is the American people learning that the system can't fix the system. Even someone that they believe is their sort of guy against the establishment won't or can't do it. I think, though, and here's my thing. Once in a while, there is one guy that comes along who can fix the system from within the system, but you got to sneak him in the back door, right? So what you do is you go to the back door of the White House, you knock on it, you talk to Bob. He's a Secret Service guy. His name's Bob. He's a nice guy. You say, "Hey, this is my friend Eddie. Bring him in there." Oh, there.
What up?
It's not Brett.
How's it going?
We're just talking about you coming in the back door.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of my specialty. I just love to sneak in. How's it going? Well, you guys have been having fun streaming. I've been doing the hard work of networking. I just got in a Discord with a bunch of Palestinian TikTok creators. So
Very cool.
I'm doing real hard work there. So.
Well, so back to the Trump for 1 second. I was joking about the whole backdoor thing. There was a song called "Backdoor Man" that used to make me giggle as a teenager. But so Trump wins again, right? Nothing changes. where do we go from here? When we talk about a revolutionary force in American society, discontented people are the potential for that revolutionary force. And if we dismiss them like the frauds and the fake left and the fake Marxists, the people that genuinely, honestly, what they're doing is dishonoring the word Marxist by using it as some sort of personal identification rather than trying to embody what it means to be a Marxist and a communist. When they tell you like, oh, these people are all evil and whatever, there's a reason they're the ones saying that. And there's a reason we talk about the actual development of the American working class, right? We're learning these lessons for itself. I don't know. What do you think, Eddie?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of came in here in the middle of your guys' conversation, but are you talking about like the communist position on Trump being taken off the ballot, or?
No, it's sort of like what happens when Trump wins again? What happens to MAGA when nothing changes? When all the things they think Trump is going to do doesn't happen?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. What I've been thinking about a lot lately too is what happens if they're successful in taking Trump off the ballot and he doesn't get to run? Like, what is that going to do to the MAGA base? How infuriated are people going to be? I don't know. Because, like, honestly, he didn't do that much in his last 4 years, that he promised, and people still seem to trust him. Like, and I guess that's what the whole dark MAGA, that's what that whole idea is that Trump should go in again, but this time be more uncompromising and like understand that the swamp is not easy to drain. And he's gonna go in and be harsher and actually drain the swamp. I don't necessarily foresee that happening. I think without a theoretical analysis, honestly, it's impossible to drain the swamp. You just end up being like Trump or Vivek Ramaswamy, talking about the swamp but unable to drain it. So I don't know. I don't know how people react. It would react. That's looking way far down the line too. Like so many. I just noticed Carlos is cracking up.
Carlos is still on his like SNL break over something in the chat.
I think the chat got Carlos going. There's some. I was laughing at that too.
But yeah,
pork and beans.
That's sort of my point. Is no matter who is president, Trump or Biden, the same things are going to happen. Basically, there's not going to be a difference. The only real difference there was the Supreme Court picks, but that doesn't even matter so much. The Democrats literally used passing abortion to the states as a political football and lost, and then acted like it was the Republicans' fault, right? The whole thing was a sort of, we used to call that the old switcheroo, which also has a funny connotation. But so what gets to the sort of next thing is there are all these discontented people, and when Trump is no longer a solution, they're all gettable, right? And what we should be doing is priming people for that. Like, okay, we'll go with your guy. Let's see if he drains the swamp this time. Let's see if he brings production back. Let's see if he doesn't only cut taxes for the elites, which means more taxes for us. Let's see if the economy doesn't keep going down. People don't keep falling out of the middle class and whatever. If, like sort of set the groundwork for that.
I went to go, this is kind of on topic, but also kind of off topic. But I went to see Vivek with my buddy the other day because he was in the area, and of course he dropped out. And it was very obvious when I went to see him. He's just sort of like trying to be Trump light, and draw from the exact same base. But he said something funny. He said Trump doesn't understand when you hit the swamp hits back. And I went with my roommate, who is a comedian. thought that was the funniest line ever. And now he's writing a bit about how when you hit the swamp hits back. But I think that's what we're seeing with Trump now. He angered the swamp even a little bit, and now the swamp's hitting back.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I think Vivek, it's Ramaswamy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he's I mean, we've been saying he was a fraud from the beginning. First of all, like he's
It's pretty
clearly
obvious.
just an actor trying to capitalize on Trump's thing. But what really gives away, so about like less than a week before he drops out of the race, he liquidates most of his shares in his business to give himself a giant campaign contribution. Right? So takes that money out of it, which is not, by the way, I don't want to get into the financial, the markets thing, but so what he does, he gives this to his campaign as a campaign contribution, tax free, and then drops out of the race. And then who gets that money? That's all money rather than a share. That's called fraud. But yeah.
It's absolutely. I wish I had his like little pamphlet that they gave people at the doors when you walked into his event. I just finally threw it away today, but it said on there like Vivek made his money as a hedge fund manager and a pharmaceutical capitalist. Then he's up there railing against the pharmaceutical industry. It's like, what? You're just railing against them because they're your competitors. And the way that him and his wife was there and she spoke too, the way that they distinguish him from the other pharmaceutical capitalists is saying that he had 4 medicines patented. And that showed that he was doing it differently and he was, using capitalism to fight corruption. I'm like, oh my God. It was tough to listen.
So what he's doing is preventing other people from creating medicine?
Right. It's such a scam.
And by the way, how do you get to become this? It's because you're born with money. Ain't nobody rising up from nothing in this era. Period.
Have you ever thought that he could have just been innovative?
That's a very good point, Marxist.
We were talking.
He risked it.
Yeah, we were talking last stream. I think I was with Eddie on that one about the figure of MLK and how after the Trump phenomenon, it seems like the ruling class has had to make Trump-like radical recuperators, because it is true that Trump's base is largely popular. That doesn't mean that there isn't a petty bourgeois and bourgeois segment to it, but even the bourgeois segment, it's largely rooted in the national bourgeoisie and the part of the bourgeoisie that's not within what it's called the deep state, the security state, the national security state, and it's also not very much connected, or at least nowhere near. To the other bourgeois politicians, to global finance capital. There is connections, obviously, a lot more than regular working people have, but nowhere near to those of like a Joe Biden. And what's interesting is that a large part of Trump's base, the working class base, the people that follow him, because of the anti-establishment, anti-deep state rhetoric, they're very anti what they call globalism, which is really just capitalism at a globalized stage. Super anti-Klaus Schwab and all these things. But all of these new fake Trump-like figures, radical recuperators, to recuperate the people that have liked the Trump way of apparent dissenting the system, all of them are very much embedded in the thing they call globalism. Because you see, someone mentioned earlier, Millet's speech at the WEF. Look at the comments that Klaus Schwab gave for Millet. Oh, he's finally bringing freedom and free markets. And they love these guys. They absolutely love them. So I think it's interesting. Part of the left, they get something correct. I don't think Trump is actually what can oppose the establishment. I think it's only socialism that can oppose that. But objectively, the establishment is very scared of Trump for a variety of reasons. He's unstable. There's various parts of his analysis where he is America first and as a state that represents the global financial oligarchy. That's not beneficial to the interest of what the state wants to uphold. So they're trying to look for ways to recuperate Trump-like parts of the working class base, while removing the more substantively anti-establishment parts of Trump. And I think Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSanctimonious, and a few others are a part of this pattern.
One of the most interesting things Vivek said was that he said in his first term he would make Malay look like a moderate. But at the same time, he also had in his pamphlet, there are people who are reformists and there are people who are revolutionaries. And I think that we need a revolution. So he's pitching himself as a revolutionary. He said multiple times that I am the anti-establishment candidate in this race. He invoked the American Revolution, said we need to live up to our ideals when, he's a pharmaceutical capitalist who doesn't want to fundamentally reform the economic system. Right. And that's the whole game, is that they're part of the ruling class while they're, pointing out corruption without pointing out the root of that corruption. It's just failing to see capitalism as the root of our problems. And that's because they ultimately benefit from capitalism. That's why after I saw Vivek, I made that TikTok where I was mocking the idea that you hear all the time from working class people in the Midwest, at least. We need a businessman to run this country, a real businessman, an outsider who owns a business. It's like, how about a working class person? How about working class people running this country? Like, what is, a businessman versus a politician? The businessmen are the people who own the politicians. You're
Right.
just cutting out the middleman. Like, why not have the workers run things for once?
And here's my thing, like, who are the people trying to convince us we need a businessman? It's those businessmen, right? Like, no shit, they're trying to convince us we need a businessman. They want to be in charge so they can keep living off us like leeches. But I'll tell you what, every businessman I've ever met has been so far up his own ass, it ain't even funny. I know of one that was a decent human being that I've met. And he was actually all right. But most of them have no idea what they're doing. They're not smarter than us. They're not more capable than us. In fact, I would say, pound for pound, the working class is genuinely smarter than the ruling class.
Oh, yeah.
In sort of organic problem-solving ability, like that essential thing we call inherent intelligence, right? Thank you, Battle Cossack, for the 50.
Thank you.
We will continue washing people's brains. Absolutely.
You bet.
But, I was about to say ultimately, and this like anarchism, which is really just this childish dogma being used by that same ruling class to do the same leeching off of us they always do. Is his speech at the World Economic Forum that Klaus Schwab was praising up and down, like he said, saying, he was bringing the rule of law and freedom back to Argentina. The rate of inflation in Argentina is at 25% right now. People are eating out of fucking dumpsters, right? And it has gotten worse than under the Social Democrats and Peronists from before. Now, Milei goes to the WEF and starts whining about the socialists and the collectivists everywhere, like he does, right? All of it is an act. It's Zelensky, but in Argentina. It's an actor they hire to get us somehow thinking that capitalism is the thing to keep doing because the essential nature of it is what lets them keep leeching off us. There's a reason Schwab loves the guy, yet everybody is convinced Schwab is somehow a communist when he's in charge of the most powerful capitalist institution on the planet. That's insane. Unpack that thought for a minute, just a minute, and you'll see it yourself.
That's I hate to keep bringing it back to Vivek, but he was saying he was going to be, you know, Malay on steroids, but then at the same time he critiqued the World Economic Forum repeatedly throughout the speech, and then, you know, Javier Malay shows up at the World Economic Forum, and all these Davos people are praising his speech, and it's like, so the question I wanted to ask, I didn't get a chance to get the microphone, it would have been awesome, but like, okay, so he talks about abolishing the FBI. Do you have any plan to use the state as a tool to crack down on the World Economic Forum? Because that's mostly run by private entities, and you criticize it, right? You talk about how it's evil and dictatorial and leads to corruption, but it's private. Are you going to use the government as a tool to crack down on them, or the NED, or any of these, you know, private organizations who do the work of the state? But I mean, that right there shows everything that's wrong with the utopian libertarian ideology. They think we'll just decrease the size of the state. Okay, well then you're literally just handing everything over to corporations then. Congratulations.
Yeah. Carlos, what was that thing you just pulled up? I've seen that picture before where people are claiming Schwab has like a bust of Lenin or something.
Oh yeah, let me pull it up real quick. I removed it, but yeah, it went viral a few days ago on the right.
Yeah,
Schwab supposedly with a bust of Lenin.
Not a bust of Lenin. I doubt that's even his office. People just can't think. It's wild.
I mean, that looks like Lenin. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it's a deep fake, but
I mean, he wants to put chips in people's brains, and that's actually what communism is. That's
Yeah,
what we want to do.
It's silliness. It's using things to verify preconceptions rather than holding that up to interrogation, right? We know nothing about this picture. It's all based on assumption. Is that actually his office? Maybe. Steve Bennett also called himself a Leninist. Does that mean he's a Leninist? You know what I mean? Like, actually look at and examine the content of a thing. And this is why this like surface level childish brand marketing ideology needs to be combated at every level. Getting people to think about the genuine essence of a thing is key. Yeah, I don't think that's Lenin either. I know that it looks like him, but I was told that it wasn't actually Lenin. That was,
who the hell
but
could it be?
you know, who knows?
Interesting.
Ecuador is at war with drug cartels. I remember Diana Mondino condemning the cartels as narco-socialist terrorists. Is that
Jesus Christ.
Interesting. Thank you, Battle Cossack. I don't know too much about Ecuador. Yeah.
I haven't been following it that closely either. I've been looking a little closer to Guatemala that just had their first soft social democratic president elected since the coup of Jacobo Arbenz in 1954, I believe. And they tried to basically use some form of lawfare to prevent him from taking office. It took like 17 hours for him to be sworn in. But yeah, I think I've seen some of the interviews that Danny has done in Ecuador, but I haven't been following it very closely.
I wish we had time to follow everything closely. I really do.
If only we could clone ourselves. How do we do that?
We need to ask Klaus Schwab.
I want a clone of Eddie that I can use like as a personal trainer.
I need to clone myself, dude. There's too many things I need to do. Before we close out the stream, I want to make sure. I'm sure you guys already know who this is. But I've been listening to this guy a bunch lately. He's a pro-Palestinian artist, Samer. He's been in the background of some of our Instagram posts lately.
Hell yeah.
His music's amazing. So make sure y'all check him out and play his songs on Spotify. Like, he gets a lot of views, but obviously when you make pro-Palestinian content, you're not going to get boosted by the music industry. You know, it's just not something that lends itself to making a lot of money off music. So go check him out on Spotify and boost his content and share it with people. Because it's pretty fantastic, especially this song. It's pretty incredible. So he actually made it 2 years ago, which is interesting because now it's blowing up again. Because it applies so well to what's going on 2 years later.
Very, very cool. Yeah, everybody check that out. I think it feels like we're winding down here. I mean, we've been going for about 2.5 hours. I'm just pumped Eddie managed to come in at the end here. But yeah, I'm gonna be on Nick from RBN's show tomorrow at noon, so make sure you check that out. Other than that, I'm good. I think that's it.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I think we had some great discussions. I wish Eddie would have been here for the early ones where we were criticizing our critics and unpacking them and talking about MLK, Trump, the American trajectory, and all other sorts of good stuff. But
no, I'm going to be joining you on RBN. I just checked the DMs from Nick. So tune into RBN tomorrow if you want to see me and Noah.
Hell yeah, even better.
All right, brothers.
JB's show tomorrow night. By the way, everybody.
Thank you to all who commented and who watched and liked. Make sure to like and share the stream, please. Thank you to the folks that were able to donate. Cobra Commander coming in strong at the beginning with a big donation. Thank you to Dino. Thank you to Comrade Estarback, Comrade Justin, Sam. I don't think we got to thank Sam. Thank you so much, Sam, for the $2. And thank you to Battle Cusack twice. So, we'll wrap up here. We'll see you in a couple of days, very likely. Thank you to all who joined. If you haven't already, make sure to pick up our recent publication from the publishing press, Dr. Reagan's On Lenin's Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky, where you hear or read about
best one.
Yes, where you get to read about the renegades of our day. And without further ado, let's get the international up. We'll see you all pretty soon. Peace.
Without a radical redistribution of political and economic